stunning. Thank you, particularly thank you for giving me the passport that I don't have, but that my father arranged for me to claim, the German passport, which I'm very touched to be here. I have messed it up already. Okay. So, how's everyone? I know you're working like crazy. Are you in the mood for me, or can we go on? Do we need to do some yoga first, or music, or something? Or I could try to sing this for you, but you don't want that. So I had to disable part of my switchboard for this talk and had to shred a lot, because what I wanted to do with you was to show you how the dilemma of receiving a prize, which is a supplement to one's oeuvre and even menaces to make it way too legible and redeemable in a certain way, how all of this, in a certain serious and systematic way, interferes with some of the major conceptual apparatuses that Hannah Arendt sets up for her work. It trips her up in a certain way. But it hadn't occurred to me to think about this Gestell of the prize, what it means to be granted. Certainly, if we had time, part of the switchboard would take us to Heidegger and what Gunst and granting and favoring and destinal giving indicates, what it means to be granted recognition, and without having Hegel mess it up for you and make it part of a battle unto death. I hadn't considered it, but unconsciously I started working on it in the so-called Goethe effect, which was Friedrich's idea, Kittler, that it be called that in German. He scrambled a lot of it. He actually translated, Friedrich Kittler honored me by after I freaked out. I saw this piece of shit that was a purported translation of my first book, and I cried, and Friedrich had arranged for it to be published in Fink Verlag, and he said, okay, I'll do it myself. I said, you don't have to. Oh, shut up, I'll do it. He spent months and months and months. Anyway, and then he takes a bus and leaves it there with, in the pre-Kinko copy editing, not copy editing, that's lapses, but in the pre-days of copies and emails and saving things. So he lost it. He lost it. I lost it. He lost it. We lost him. We lost it. So let's send some energy to the memory of Friedrich Kittler and all of our masters and mastresses. Let us summon them here as we try to think together. So I had thought about prizes when Freud received the Goethe Prize and really tripped up in certain severe ways and what it meant for him. And it's also encumbering for Hannah Arendt to receive the Lessing Prize. It's encumbering for all sorts of overdetermined reasons. And she's going to have to pull a few fast ones. But then some unconscious moves occur that I wanted to bring to your attention and see how you're going to want to work with it. But I only came to this project because Dominic Seschner decided to kind of upgrade or even see the prize, the award, as a significant technological add-on and almost app system to any kind of work production or oeuvre, what it means to a work, to our relation to an oeuvre, that it might be or wants to see itself destinally inflected toward a prize. So that was a reason that I had to get cracking and thinking about a prize, and I'll explain here how the Lessing Prize became important to me. If we had time, we would really consider all sorts of things, including what it means for Hannah Arendt. And so we're reading her staggering toward the prize. Jaspers pushed her and said, "You go, girl, you have to get up there and take it." And she's like, "No, I don't want to go. No, thanks. You have to." But what it does, even if we had time to reconnect to her work on the pariah, the Jew as pariah, Jews, according to her, don't want to be distinguished. No, thank you. There has to be another kind of more quiet, discreet way to barely eke out an existence. So what it means also to get up, every prize, as I will try to thematize here, asks you to say who you are. And it's not sufficient for her to say, "I am you," in the sense that Lessing had not on their Weise say that. "I am a man." Okay, that's not good enough. So she has to struggle with that. Now, I won't be able to go into the rhetorical ops or operations that she brings with her to this difficult moment. And where do we situate a prize? Is it within or outside? Is it a strange reformatting of the work that is being recognized, and by whom? So I'll spare you some performative backslides, and I can't even go into the politically stacked food chain of affect that gets disturbed by the prize, and what it means to go to a place in friendship, because otherwise why accept anything? You must go in friendship. But Hannah Arendt has a lot to say against compassion. Do you all know that already? She's really, I'm saying it too quickly, against compassion. She thinks it's very weak affect. She doesn't say Christian, but it's in the neighborhood, I think, without her saying so, of the Nietzschean toxicity of pity. She says, "Don't show me compassion. I don't want to hear about les malheureux, les misérables," even though it's a Broadway hit. I don't want to know about that. How about I don't give a shit, this is my translation, about your little affect scale in terms of those who are persecuted and insulted. What about justice for all? Why don't you work on that and keep your uncontained sense of a driven and false identity with the other to yourself? So she's very strong on this, and she says that compassion has never been politically relevant. It's of no use and no interest. This is very shocking, and this is something that I think we need to look at. She also tosses out fraternity in favor of friendship. And if we had time, we would read Derrida, asking, okay, égalité, liberté, égalité, and excuse me, what? Fraternity? What's that doing there? And all brotherhoods and gang formations. So she wants to kick that to the curb as well. But friendship then splits according to Lessing and Rousseau. For Rousseau, it's like, beat a retreat, have your best friend as a palliative consultant. And she thinks this was a dangerous decision historically. Whereas for Lessing, friendship is where you really show up and begin to prime the political machine. Friendship becomes the exemplary modality of being with the other that creates a kind of politically relevant and necessary intrusion, an affirmative intrusion in the way things are. And that's something that Lessing was able to sustain and carry off. So let me just say that for Hannah Arendt, the unreliability of compassion as a political instigator is very important, also in her negotiating with whether she should accept something that actually might look like a kind of stray shot of compassion, this little Jewish thinker. I mean, what her introjects are is something we could discuss some other time. But she does warn us of the mush and chaotic prompts of ungroundable affect, emotions without a sealant to hold them to the promise of reparative justice. Compassion just won't cut it, she says. So these are things that we might want to look at together, and these are things that I'm now just hanging to the wayside or kicking to the wayside. You can interrupt, discuss with me at any point. Hannah Arendt says that this is what our point is, to try to find a Gespräch, to talk, to discuss. She also learns from Lessing, or makes Lessing be the exemplar of coming to the world and to your friends, and I'm so pleased to be here among my friends, with joy. And she means this as a strong, almost musculated decision that that sharing sadness or staging sadness is a way of turning away from the world. It's very, very emphatically underscored by her, and it's as though you just better get your joy on. This is part of her political imperative. So nonetheless, so you don't go to the encounter with the other unless you're prepared to show and center yourself in a joyful relation to language. So let's consider how that gets mashed up with the kind of imperative to pick up the prize. Can she do it? Can she swing it? And if she can't, how does that create a political undertow that also undermines her theoretical work? The way I see it, she is smoking mad, picking up Lessing's polemical style and throwing it down. So this is going to be a problem too. The Germans are giving her the Lessing Prize. The Germans, or what we're calling provisionally the Germans, couldn't stand Lessing. You know, he was not a prize, he was a pill. And he was always chronically pissed off at everyone. This guy was like a ranting, raving maniac. But he's made to somehow be the name of a prize. I would love that prize. Any maniacal prize. Anyway, the prize, a supplement to her work, menacing it with finite markers and legibility, a certain degree of classifiability and appropriation insinuates also a hostile decree and throws her off her game. I want us to think about what an award is throughout, so that'll be one of the tracks that I'll ask you to carry, and to think, is it a secular downgrade from the poetic drunken days of more transcendent supports and bestowals? And not to forget the orders and honors distributed at whim by feudal lords. This is something that our friend Werner Hamacher, I'd like to send him particular protective energy tonight, discussed with us just last year at NYU, that the prize scales down from what feudal lords bestowed. I always wanted to, but no one followed me, wanted to be a prize bestower at NYU because I think it would give us a lot of power. And everyone said, well, you have to read everything that everyone did, and you have to deal with those psycho ass kissers. I said, that's fine. But anyway, one recalls the struggle Celan and scores of others had to engage before stepping up to receive the announced prize. In the case of Paul Celan, he had to convert to prose and map the meridian, his famous speech that asks, "Wer bist du?" So it will get connected, if not explicitly, to Lessing, because that's the question in Nathan der Weise. Wer bist du? Who are you? One of the imperious gestures of the prize is to tell you who you are, what you are, how you're faring, maybe even where you belong. It presumes accessible membership and confers all sorts of dialectical chaos around the notion of recognition. So is it a legitimate form of recognition? Is it something that must be encountered with shame or... So I assigned myself to Hannah Arendt because I wanted to look at her reflections on the Klage, which is something that I'm working on, and this is a topic that had commanded my attention for 2 or more years, particularly in view of the playoffs initiated by Goethe's Werther. In France, they always say Werther, where the asserted difference starting on letter 1 between complaint and lament becomes a matter of life and death. Was ist der Mensch, dass klagen darf? What is it about humans that they can lament? How come they get to lament? And that would be an off-ramp, maybe. Do machines complain or lament? And what would that attribute or determination insinuate in some of our thinking about technology? So this sets the tonal stakes against which Werther's fateful reconciliation via the complaint, the Beschwerde, with its earthy heaviness. You think of the schwer in Beschwerde, the heaviness weighs in here, stays on the side of life and vital economies. Werther can answer to the call of the complaint. And if Goethe, our neighbor here, makes that distinction, that the complaint kind of keeps you going from Goethe to Philip Roth, at least. But the Klage can do you in, a subject that fills another dossier, but one that marks and frames Arendt's acceptance, not so acceptance speech when awarded the Lessing Prize, Wer bist du? So we're confronted from the beginning by a conceptual snag, a knot of stalls and ethical starts that make this speech impossible for Arendt to assume, always referring back to the other who is the future, but also the covert destination of the prize made in his name and conferred upon Arendt, who must take and give the prize back, if it is at all to be accepted, in and to the names of Lessing. The prize is destined to her in and by the name Lessing, but he can only illegitimately issue an award to the extent that, as I said earlier, the Germans denied him recognition. Of course, if you and I could jam, or you and I could jam on this, what it means to get an award in the name of the one who was strictly and systematically queued up for rejection. So they could never award him a prize, having failed to understand or prize Lessing's radicalism, which is now bestowed upon her in his name, as if to avoid his lastingly destructive accomplishment. So here we have something about how people get conscripted into being Staatsphilosophen, in a sense, how they get appropriated, or big elephant tranquilizers go into their memories and memorializing kind of oeuvre. So how do you calm down the destructive accomplishment of certain thinkers who have not yet arrived? Lessing, for instance, did not believe in truth. He polemicized and offended. He insisted on befriending the most inimical aliens and held his ground as he was faltering, powered up on rage. Lessing's temper disclosed world. Aber der Zorn und vor allem der Lessing'sche Zorn stellt die Welt bloß. So this is very beautiful, that anger, above all, Lessing's anger reveals world. I don't think you could imagine Heidegger saying something like that. World welts, you could say in English. Yeah. But moreover, Lessing hat mit der Welt, am I screaming? Am I schreien? No, sorry. Okay. Lessing hat mit der Welt, in der lebte, seinen Frieden nie gemacht. So Lessing never made peace with the world in which he lived. Unappeasable, Lessing stalks the scene. His name is that of bestowal, which can never revert to him, but must be paid back to his name like a haunting debt that one, in fact, can never repay. Nevertheless, Hannah adopts Lessing to make a pitch for Selbstdenken, without a self, his famous independent thinking for oneself in darkest, morally downtrodden times. Gee, I wonder if we can relate to that. When one stands and falls on one's own, but not even on one's so-called own, because all that pretend independence has been taken away. Now, literature sometimes proves capable of breaking the fall. And this is where William Faulkner shades in, a writer who shows that nothing is mastered. Now, in France, it's considered vulgar to do this. Are you okay with my doing this? I'm not trying to be vulgar or obscene. Someone from the audience in France stage directed me and said, I really like your work, but I was shocked to see you do this. So now okay. If it offends, let me know. So in a writer who shows that nothing is mastered in the sequences that has the tragic hero resuffering the past, throttled by indignation and just anger, fueled and revved up by the mega rival of Lessing and the rest of the guys, with the exception maybe of Schiller and Nietzsche, who resolutely honored Goethe. Now this, for me, has all sorts of special effects and music, dun, 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 dun. As Goethe has said, wait a minute, I thought this was the Lessing Prize. I always look for and try to track when Goethe delivers a historical smackdown of what's going on. This is the Lessing Prize. She's praising the other one, Lessing, but when the stakes are very, very high, it's suddenly she switches them. Okay, and my shit detectors go up, and that's as medial technological as I can get today. Because Goethe has said auf einmal, Goethe, in the dedication to Faust, der Schmerz wird neu, es wiederholt die Klage des Lebens labyrinthisch ihren Lauf. So pain returns again, lament repeats life's labyrinthine, erring, insane course. So I'd love to get into the labyrinthine itinerary that has Goethe, rather than Lessing, nail the action that establishes its meaning and the permanent significance which then enters into history. So when the chips are down, she's like, get out of my way, Lessing. Here's what Goethe has to say. Goethe appears on the scene when another kind of action insinuates itself into the politically and world-binding argument, that of poetic being. Poetic saying signals an intrinsic activity and a need for relating what has happened, she writes, an act that, shaping history, however, solves no problems and assuages no suffering. It does not master anything once and for all. This is very Zen. Everything, we have to count on poetic being when the chips are radically done, but it's not going to resolve anything or help you. But that's the only help we get. It's a Kafkian kind of logic. The mastering of the past is relegated to a tentative stance. It cowers behind quotation marks. So she says, this is how you master the past, but she goes, master the past. So if I had Derridian expanses, we would spend 3 hours, you poor kids, on why the quotation marks hold up or close down mastering. So is this the unmastering of mastery? What's going on? Why can't we just master the past? No, we master the past. So it's a tentative thing. Instead of establishing mastery, again, here a deconstructive run would have you see that at the very point where only poetry is what you can hang on to, it's not going to master anything. But it will master something in a reiterative way, kind of. It cites itself, citing a once forgotten pain, reappearing, searing, writing itself out in repetition. Hannah, the tragic impact of this repetition in lamentation, she writes, affects one of the key elements of all action. So you know that she stakes everything on action, and this is going to be the poetic prompt, a necessary Anstoß to action. And this is how you enter history. So the stakes are very high. Historical safekeeping must be placed in the custody of poetic repetition, trusting the poetic act that names its own relation to repetition, repeating itself at the end of an action, for the meaning of a committed act is revealed only when the action itself has come to an end and become a story susceptible to narration. The stuff she says about literature and narration and poetry is sometimes hair-raisingly off the walls, but it's still very important and one can't just dismiss. I mean, she does think that actions come to an end, that narration picks up the relay. She has certain very unmovable assertions to make. So Insofar as any mastering of the past is possible, it consists in relating what has happened. Poetry breaks into the caesura, picking up the slack of a pause that resists closing woundedness in a gesture that is not identical to closure. So here I refer you to Jean-Luc Nancy, who makes a distinction between the end of something and closure, not identical syntactical or semantic fields. Arendt believes that an action comes to an end and readies itself for narration. The literary theorist in me will leave her in peace on this point, hoping only to indicate the reverberations of non-ending and the possibility that narration in its own ways makes, constitutes, and breaks, betrays history, rhetorically kidnapping some of its referential cognates. But I refrain from quibbling, and my complaint does not amount to a hill of beings or a halt in her solid argument and diacritical subversions. The poetic recap, which is an originary mark, so it's through repetition that you have an access code to an experience, and it has to be a poetic recap. So that's the originary mark. That's what sets everything up, initiates history, is then the only means to mastering the past. But Arendt is rigorous on this point, for she keeps mastery at bay with quotation marks. As per usual, Goethe scrambles the master codes. The dedication does not supply content. I mean, she quotes Goethe, and if we had time to discuss what it means to call in the big guns, like Goethe, at a moment to back up your argument, but she doesn't read him, because the dedication that she says tells us everything doesn't have a content, really, nor the slightest narrative clue about what might have instigated the named affliction. It runs only with the thought of repetition as cohort to pain. This is why Freud siphoned off so much from Goethe. Without backdrop or forward-looking indication, Goethe appears, on the contrary, to withhold story. Blurring meaning or graspable significance, the dedication talks to ghosts, allows friendship and love to capsize on unconscious waves, rides on the lament complaint's capacity to shroud narrativity or downplay story. Hannah Arendt brings in Goethe to a short testimony where he refuses attestation while allowing for the form of Klage to assume the place of sheer repetitive affliction. He disturbs her running economies of acceptance, undermining the cause for which he's made to stand, including the most hypothetically restricted recuperation of history and cognition. Okay, translation into English. She brings him in to nail a point, and he subverts it. It's not there. So how do you read this? Is she double dealing, or what's her relation, and why does it have to be Goethe after she's forgotten Lessing for a moment? But even so, in view of the unmastered past, the master poet approaches the scene of political inscription, indicating, if not explicitly stating, but this signature, I would say, suffices to make this happen, to exemplify and enact. So just bringing in Goethe, he doesn't have to have a content or anything. Something happens at that moment that proves to her that we are constantly preparing for poetry, also in quotation marks, in the broadest sense as a human potentiality. I mean, that is heavy shit. That we're constantly, and that is, as it were, the determination of Dasein, which is to be preparing for poetry or poetry. This insight into preparatory phrasing, an essential relation to and of poetry, indicates where the crucial motif of survival enters the discursive scene. This is why Arendt can't just be left to political scientists, by the way, as much as I love them. You know how in mafia films they go, I love you. It means, okay, sorry. I love them. You know, it's like, with all due respect, your sister is a whore. You know, it's just, with all due respect. Arendt needs to be taken into the custody also of those who live and die by the poetic act. We can share those worlds, but they don't. Okay, so this is where survival enters the discursive scene, for the telling over of what took place comes to a halt for the time being, and a formed narrative, one more item, is added to the world's stock. Flanked by quotation marks, poetry in this context bears a different valence than mastery, bowed and marked down by the same but not identical quotation marks. So quotation marks work differently each time. Poetry, by contrast, expands under the accompanying marks, making it a quality of being for which we always prepare. So even if you don't know it, this is what you are preparing for. And to quote Shakespeare, the readiness is all. Whether or not we recognize poetry, it is our way in, a flex of survival pulled by the death drive. Ceding to traumatic rendering and repetition, the narrative has been given its place in the world where it will survive us. Poetry builds toward what will stay on. Where have I heard that before? Even though Goethe has supplanted Lessing to score the point of a narrative exigency and traumatic repetition, the wisdom Arendt locates to poetic being comes, one would have to say, from Hölderlin, poet of a certain cut of instauration and survival. He stated, famously, too famously, was bleibet aber, stiften die Dichter. So roughly, what remains, what survives, is grounded by the poets. A poetic phrase become by now almost too famous, but one that Arendt quietly cues in terms of historical, though not historial, granting. By not mentioning Hölderlin, a lot is going on, and if we could take an off-ramp to the secret access to Hölderlin, we'd have a lot to say, I'm sure. Moving unmasterable experience into poetic phrasing connects the unbearable to the born world, marking our finitude by means of the poeticity that lives, or rather limps on. I'm suggesting that there is a covert scene supportive of another, if silent, track that seals in the name of Hölderlin and the relentless appropriations of his poetic saying made by her mentor, of course, Heidegger. By dropping the curtain on these players, and I refer to your work, Arendt is also saying what she is not saying in her acceptance-rejection speech, namely in part that we no longer recruit poetry to the cause of destinal instauration, of nation or community, but count on it to name and survive, if on crutches, and the crutches of quotation marks, the traumatic destruction of such endangering mystifications and ideological loopholes for which poetry allows but cannot in the end, after the end, sign. Neither Lessing nor Goethe belongs particularly to part of the team of Heideggerian primal and primed poets. In fact, Heidegger's choices, including those that land him on Hölderlin and Trakl, are remarkably off the wall. I mean, when you think whom Heidegger chose at that point, it's mind-boggling. At least he's off the traditional listservs of secured critical value. At the time Heidegger selected them for his mission statements, Hölderlin and Trakl were not the critical blockbusters and ghostbusters that they have since become. But this is another story, or story, requiring another run at him, complicating the Heideggerian legacy even further. Arendt deposes the baggage. So it's also necessary to attune oneself, by the way, to the silent channels, the invisible channels, where the mentors go underground, get effaced, even defaced or forgotten, remembered, unmastered, and so on and so forth. So there's another story here, a backstory in her relation to her mentor, and what would one of the destinies of this prize be coming from Heidegger to Hannah? Listen, by the way, if you're zoning out or anything, I don't have a hysterical need or ecological sphere that requires me to go on and on. You just tell me, darling, thank you, we got the message, and I'm happy. So don't feel you have to be coercively straitjacketed. Though I love the idea. You should be so lucky, right? Okay. So, Arendt deposes the baggage, and if I had time, another off-ramp. You notice I can't pronounce her name because I'm slaloming between the German and English pronunciations, and that's important. What language is she going to choose to accept the prize? How will she hear her name called out? She deposes the baggage consisting of destiny, destination, nation, folk, in order to place her world-binding wager. Her literary bodyguards bet on worldliness, consistently showing nothing but scorn for the puny yet destructive pretensions of the language-ballooning myths of national destiny. Make America great again. Tropes of survival require another platform. On the face of it, then, Goethe pinch hits. Those of you who don't know baseball, do you need to know what pinch hits mean? Pinch hits for Lessing at a moment of crucial elaboration, when themes of traumatic grief and historical poetic saying converge. Here and elsewhere in German letters, Goethe acts as guarantor for survie, an arc of sur or supervival, I would call it, the strength of non-resentimental living on for which Nietzsche and Blanchot have credited him. Let us, however, leave this largely Derridian and Benjaminian reflection aside for now. Signing and living on, Goethe crushes his contemporaries, or anyone that gets in his way, the upstarts or those crawling consociates, dead or alive, any present or future rivals. In terms of his contemporaries, Goethe tended to knock them off the table, blithely carrying on while the neighboring poets knew only shipwreck. You just imagine him, I see him coming through here, mowing down all those fragile, fabulous poets and writers. Blanchot surmises that the great poet will never be forgiven his ability to step over corpses. Well, Blanchot is less crude about getting this point across. The great poet Goethe will never be forgiven for surviving while the others fell apart. I've tried to track his stock of power pills and their side effects all the way to Freud and Benjamin, who by remote control were also shaken to the core, felled at critical moments by the strength of this signifier, the monumentality of a German language bearer without institutional rival, then or now, Goethe's vampirizations and tremendous appetite for devouring the other. He also was so strong that he told Eckermann, I would like to be devoured by the other. Yum. Okay, that's my translation too. So his tremendous appetite for devouring the other writers behind and ahead of the rounds he continues to make is not part, alas, of my beat today. Let me just indicate that Arendt takes recourse to the particularly strong yet enigmatic Klage at the starting gate of Faust for the purpose of naming the unmasterable aporia that has her accepting a prize from the committee at Hamburg in the German language, treating Lessing as though he were a contemporary, riddled by doubters, resituated in the first half of the 20th century with its political catastrophes, its moral disasters, and its astonishing development of the arts and sciences. That all goes together, it's toggled together, and it's something we should consider. So how are we doing? How is your energy? We have like 15 minutes of, yeah, okay. The Klage bears its own form of generativity, underscoring the plaintive position of disillusionment from which she must take courage. There were other plaintiffs lined up behind her who tripped over their own vocabularies of unmasterability and pinched survival. For her part, Arendt travels between Weimar and Oxford, Mississippi, with only a stopover in Hamburg. Faulkner himself made poignant inroads in his own acceptance speech in 1949 for the Nobel Prize. One should read both these speeches together bifocally to see how Arendt bounces and feeds off the American writer from the South and the range of the chiasmic complications of her identification with William Faulkner. Such a reading, which would take us far afield in the context of our current analysis, would have to pick up threads of Arendt's own missteps regarding American forms of racism and discredited strategies of segregation. Her engagement with Faulkner would instruct us on the way her views mirror back the unmasterable German past, meaning how she understands in a relay ongoing between Germany and the Deep South, that which cannot pass or be surpassed according to simple geo-chronological schedules, but keeps returning and displacing, dynamically locating the historical haunts in Faulkner's disrupted narrations of the South. Despite the way he makes us weep and shudder, says Arendt, Faulkner calls up less of a shock than Goethe. So Faulkner freaks us out, tears us apart, but it's still not, doesn't have the shock effect of Goethe. The inclusion of Faulkner represents for Arendt a less painful example. So what does that mean, that she's immunizing us and prepping us for something we can't really deal with, namely Goethe? The inclusion of Faulkner is that less painful example of what, by means of Goethe, she must tell us. Wait, I thought I could step to the side, even walk away, but Goethe's uncanny pull reels me in. Faulkner has prepared the ground for Goethe's breakthrough appearance in the Arendt speech, offsetting Lessing's prominence in the text. So how did his strange dedication, Goethe's, drop into and onto the Lessing text? She's called on Goethe rather than Lessing to go back, to back the action that bears permanent significance in history. In my rhetoric, you may notice I'm taking my cues from the repetition of a trauma, a shock. Goethe comes in as a trauma that we are prepared for by Faulkner and even Lessing. So does the switchover run interference with the point Arendt is urging, or does this maneuver serve to protect her tenuous couple with Lessing? In the development of her argument, Goethe arrives at the possibility of reconciling ourselves to a past that we can no more master than undo. So Goethe is the name of disjointure, or what Derrida calls the disjointure, the disadjustment, the refusal of closure. But she brings him in order to establish closure. Yet he understood that we can't master or undo a past. So then I would urge us to think about what it means to re-experience suffering, which then comes up for the first time through poetic language. And she says that this is what can speak only when indignation and just anger, which impel us to action, have been silenced, and that needs time. So if we had time, we'd think about anger, indignation, and she might have said when Lessing has been silenced. But because this is weird, so she brings in Goethe to have this prompt by anger and rage, which is Lessing's MO, right? And his portrait. His is the name of anger and intervention, while the lament to which she associates Goethe is allied to recollection, the ability to sink into remembrance, to think about things in a movement of acceptance, and the dream of, but with the abysses of the thought of integration. So Goethe is so far ahead of the curve that he doesn't even expect integration to take place. But all of this is an allegory, perhaps, that may or may not allow for the acceptance of a prize encased in the name of just anger, meaning anger, bless you, anger backed by justice, evoking thus the Lessing insignia, kind of the frozen cry that you see in Laocoon. Let me just think about, she has a lot to say about anger and how it makes you ugly and how you have to risk that, the ugliness of anger, which prompts action. I wanted to say that in closing, that she agonized over which language to take in. She must do some reparative work in order to accept and internalize the ostensibly good object being offered to her. Although the bad breast of German destruction prevails, and it remains difficult to take the prize and take it in, and where does the prize get located? Where is it incorporated? Where does it land? Which orifice? So it remains difficult for her throughout to take in the prize. She has to swallow the compliment and hold it down. In this regard, she is not Nietzschean, most emetic of philosophers, who threw up such distinctions to reverse dialectics, something Deleuze points out that Nietzsche's always throwing up, but that's a way of not assimilating, not dialectizing, but reversing dialectics. Nor does she come very close to Thomas Bernhard, who railed, derailed, took the booty and booby prize, and resumed the tirade, railing to the end. So it makes us wonder where indeed such a prize may land for anyone. Certainly, which orifice receives it according to symbolic mapping and imaginary charters. So how will the receiving mouth fill itself with the given gift, the mother tongue, that in this case has lashed at her with severe consistency and unprecedented cruelty, dispensing in a blinding overdose of aggression? Or what kind of shuttle system exists following well-known psychoanalytic schedules between mouth and anus? I'm sorry, I don't have time to go there. What kind of a compromise formation does the assumption of the prize entail? In this sense, according to more ordinary calculations, what kind of disturbing sellout turns her into a world-deluded perp, an agent of betrayal? How will she negotiate the legitimate hatred that makes you ugly nevertheless, the well-founded wrath that makes your voice grow hoarse? So, on the other double-bound hand, isn't Arendt somehow obligated by a compelling logic to get over herself, step up, appropriate the prize, if only to return it to the first one to have received an eviction notice, Lessing and his Nathan der Weise? So I will skip the part about Weise and Weise, the homonymies between the orphans, the ways in Lessing, and the Waisenhaus des Seins, Nathan im Waisenhaus des Seins, or the orphaning that takes place with Nathan. I'll just tell you that he shows up, and what's in the Lessing Prize. So Lessing, if someone is going to confer on you a Lessing Prize, it implicates the entire oeuvre, certainly moments such as you show up in the orphanage of being, ungrounded, language-strapped. Tritt näher, Jude. Ich bin ein Mensch, goes the dramatic dialogue. Step closer, Jew. I am human. From her shattered perspective, this response no longer suffices. When asked to step closer, to step up, become public, and in some sense world-bound, one cannot be content merely to plead, as I said earlier, I am human. Forced on this point by a history of humiliation, one has to say, no matter how assimilated, remote, or foreign to one's so-called sense of self, that I am a Jew. I step up as a Jew to the extent that this call, this name, Jude, has been subjected to absolute destruction. Yes, something in Hannah would rather run in the other direction. Run, Hannah, run. Refuse the call, decline the conferral. Instead, pulling herself together, she hitches a ride on allegory and creates a binding world. She serves herself an imperative. So I'd like to actually not close, but I want to just indicate to you that she has to make a move and a maneuver whereby the prize isn't seen or understood as something for which you are to be thanked for your work or being, but you have to thank the bestowers. And this is a really enraging double bind. You have to get up and say, now you may, as in the Oscars, pull a fast one and thank God and your parents. But that's a burden for her. She has to somehow show a sign of support and a prototype of attestation for those who are giving her this maybe mercy prize, or assuming that everything is gut jetzt and we're now friends, and hey, Hannah, how about it? Get over yourself and thank us for thanking you, and hey, okay, can we be friends? Can't everyone be friends? So this grates against her work on Weltverlust, Rückzug aus der Welt, world retreat isn't what she can do according to her work. She's kind of obligated by the exigency of her political workouts. And so she manages somehow, it's a beautiful text, I hope you get to read it, to really work hard on the tightrope, the troping of ambivalence. And she does show up, as you know, for the Hamburger Senat and claims her prize. She's trying to make world, create world, and step in for an allegorical, if not categorical, imperative. But she can't do justice to those who can't show up, who can't depose for justice. And finally, the prize becomes a cipher for Gerechtigkeit. So it is something, and you're struggling over the possibility or impossibility of justice. Derrida said, we've never seen justice anywhere. We claim it, we want it, and when do we want it? Now. But show me. I mean, it is the Solomonic scene, justice, where he's about to, you know what. Anyway, let me just say that some were never able to get a prize, claim their prize, or speak or return to the German language again. And this is something that I would take us to that terrible problem of German having become, importantly, and to which I'm very attached and grateful, the language of Klage and the Anklage, which is to say the registered complaint and pointed accusation, a language that she understands to be that of non-address, a language to be faced evermore by the historical plaintiff, and the problem of receiving or donating an unreceivable complaint. So it may be that all those detours and disruptions have her go to Goethe on the complaint in order not to launch the complaint that she comes equipped with. Thank you.